We're live.
Hi guys, welcome back to our live stream. We're super happy to see you.
And
we
for
know
you
we
to
see
see
you.
us.
See you, but
For you to
you can see us.
Yep.
And we know that you're out there because we can see people
We
waiting,
can
I
see
think,
people
right?
waiting and 15 actually watching. So thank you
we
so
go.
much for joining us and giving us some of your Thursday afternoon. As always, every Thursday. Today we're going to be going over some basics, and we get a lot of questions on this. You guys get a lot of questions on ISO, aperture, and shutter speed. So we're going to be going over just
Three important elements of photography.
Triangle.
I can't make a triangle.
The
That looks
triangle.
Like a Hershey kiss.
Yeah, there we go. There's a triangle.
maybe we could do one with all three. Like
What?
you, Adam, you do one.
One in front and one in the
And
other.
then
like the
no,
three
and then
mo-
you turn your
three
hand.
Well,
amigos.
anyways, I think we're getting carried away. But
You
Yeah.
like it is a triangle, right? I mean,
is a
all
triangle.
three things kind of bounce from each other and affect the way
exactly.
your photos look. So
Sure.
Adam and
Exposure
Izzy
value.
took some good pictures today. We have everything from sample photos
Got
to
some
an-
photos of this guy right over here.
And some of you in action.
our main talent.
Yeah.
And
action.
we'll get the camera up and close to you guys so you can
What
see
camera is it again?
See
settings.
some of the settings.
Canon SL2.
This is
And-
your favorite vlogging camera.
Yes.
And we'll also show you. We'll show you the photos, and I've recorded all the shutter speeds, f-stops, and ISO settings, so you can kind of see the results. Because, the aperture, you can clearly see the differences. The shutter speed, you can see the difference,
bokeh.
and changing your ISO, you can see the difference. So, we have, as Veronica said, we have some great examples to show you.
Yes.
And
I think maybe a couple of things before we get started.
yep.
Want to remind people to ask questions, because I'm the one that reads your questions, and I try to get every single question to Adam, Izzy, and myself sometimes, so you can get your answers. And then we also wanted to mention we're trying out a new, what is like new gear, new equipment that we're trying out today for our live streams, and it should look better. I think it definitely looks a lot better.
Yeah,
Should show better detail now. Now you can see
we're now in
my
HD.
age.
Yeah,
My age.
we
is
might
showing.
need to get the makeup artist.
The Botox is coming.
I'll get my paintbrush from home. I just painted one wall, so I think I still have some paint.
Okay, and the other thing we wanted to mention is, as always, we like to give back. So today we have a little something for you. You have to tune in this time around. Wait till the end of the live stream to know what we're giving away. But then you also have to tune in to our video on Saturday to know if you won. So just stick around a little bit with us. It's 30 minutes of good information.
Kick back, you're probably stuck in traffic anyway
Yes.
from the looks of it out there. So.
Thumbs up if you're in traffic or you're out of work or
Well,
you're still at work.
Well, pull over to the side of the road.
Right, exactly.
Yes.
Unless you have one of those self-driving vehicles.
Yeah,
That's important, yeah.
Or you're in an Uber or Lyft.
yeah, that's awesome.
The only thing I can say, and I like to say that from now, not till the end, is what we're giving away is related to something that's essential to protect your gear under any kind of weather, especially rain, snow, just and we have
Harsh
like a
environment.
top-selling product with us here, but especially nowadays that there's so much going on that is out of our control, we want to make sure that we kind of share with you guys some information below that you can donate to Harvey's tragic consequences that happen in Texas. So the link is below, and then just stick around till the end to know what you can win that can help you out if you ever find yourself in a situation like that with some of your gear. So I guess this is a good time to get started.
Sure.
So we first want to go over, well, first of all, we're working with the SL2. Again, very popular camera, one of the newest in the lineup in the EOS Rebel. And we worked with a tried and true lens.
So
you
I'm
love
gonna-
this lens?
I'm
The
just gonna
Nifty 50.
You're gonna leave?
zip out of here so we can
Zip
get
over.
some closer shots so you can all see all the
We can
settings.
still hear you.
You can still
If you
hear
can
me.
still hear Adam, make sure to let us know, because he's going to be
Should
doing
be
some
connected, but
close-ups.
So we're gonna zoom in here.
So
to
first
the
we're going
SL2.
over
Aperture value.
aperture.
So this is, and especially on this camera, it has what they call the photo assistant. So notice how simply this allows you to, of course I'm doing it with the wheel, but you can also do it with the touchscreen. So you can actually sit here and change your aperture, which is important. It has to be on aperture value. And this way you can change your aperture to control your bokeh, i.e. your depth of field. And for that, we used the very popular Nifty 50. This guy has been a top seller in the Canon lineup for many years now. 1.8 50 millimeter. Very easy to work with, and it doesn't take up a lot of room. Notice how on this smaller footprint camera, how convenient this is to walk around with.
Does he turn it around so everybody can see the profile, so you can see
Look at that.
how compact it is?
I mean,
It's
this
fitting in
is-
his palm,
That's
the
my
palm of his
favorite
hand.
vlogging camera.
Look at this. This is, and there you go. Look, there's some bokeh right now. Thank you, Adam.
So Izzy, talk a little bit.
Basically what happens, we have a 50
Just-
millimeter 1.8. So if you open it up to the maximum aperture, it actually shows you here, which is the smaller f-stop. The smaller number is the maximum aperture. It's the opposite of what the brain
Right.
would actually think. So when you have it at 1.8, it's going to allow you to blur out your background more, and it's going to allow more light onto your subject matter. So it makes it much easier to work in low light capability.
So the aperture is one of the settings that either restricts or allows more light to pass through the lens, right?
And that changes the
But
perspective. in your depth.
changing the aperture ultimately has some sort of effect on the photo.
Yep.
So if you change to an aperture that's where it's bigger,
Mhm.
what happens?
You're going to have more light, it's going to pick a faster shutter speed, and you're also going to be able to have your subject matter in focus and blur out the background as much as possible, and the foreground, because it's narrowing your perspective in your depth of field. And I think we have some samples there, don't we, that we shot.
Yeah, we took some samples. We'll show it to you in just a moment. I have to
And you
come-
guys, who was the photographer? I guess we see
And
you
this
really.
one-
we swapped off.
Yes. Mhm.
There was some jumping going on.
There
No,
was.
we're not- there'll
I was
be some-
having a
I'm
little bit
excited
of
There's some
to see.
calisthenics, that'll be later on.
So without further ado, I'll show you, just so you get an idea of what effect the aperture has on the image. A lot of people come in here and the first thing they ask us is they want a lens that blurs out the background, but they're not really sure what does that. So as Izzy explained, the aperture has a control over that. So the aperture, I don't remember if Izzy really explained, but the aperture is inside the lens of the lens.
Older lens.
And,
I wonder if we can see this.
and it opens and closes.
Here we go.
That's a great way of explaining
This
it
is
too.
the older
Yeah.
design. This is
Right.
old school.
Going
So-
inside an
And
older
it's,
lens.
It's a little bit small in the frame over here, but as Izzy rotates the ring on the lens, which typically isn't found on today's lenses, you either open it up wider and it will be represented by an F number. And as Izzy said before, it has an inverse relationship to the size. So the smaller the number is, the larger the opening. The larger the number, the smaller number
So it would be like a
is. So
pinhole
when
like that.
when you shoot an aperture of f/22, that's going to restrict the amount of light in, and when you shoot at an aperture of 1.8, it's going to flood the sensor with. light.
So when is the background blurry? Exactly.
Background is blurry, as Izzy said,
the maximum.
at the widest maximum aperture, which would be on the lens that we used, the 51.8, 1.8.
So maximum is when it's extremely open,
Right.
Yeah.
as much as it can. Okay, great. So now let's see
Zip
some
around.
actual photos. Can you do this when you film and take
Yes,
photographs?
you can do this
Okay.
both, especially for video.
So it's the
that comes in really
same
handy.
idea. All three work the same
Yep.
for video and pictures.
Yes, so
Okay.
we're going to open up my Photoshop, and here you go. Here is Izzy.
We're closed. Sorry.
And this photo, we can see, is at an aperture of 1.8. So yeah, as you can see, Izzy is in focus over here. Izzy's in focus over here, but you see the background is really nice and soft. As we go to an aperture of f2.8, the background is still out of focus, but it's not as out of focus as it is at aperture of 1.8. And then if we close the lens down to f4, you see that some of the detail over here begins to get sharper. And Izzy's still sharp, but now you can start making out some of the stuff that's in the background. And if we close the lens down again to an aperture of f5.6, you're going to see that now you can actually make out a lot of this, make more sense of what's in the background. So again, what's good about a lens that's able to open up to 1.8 and being able to blur the background is you can get rid of distracting elements in the scene behind the subject matter. So if we go to an aperture of f8, you can now see that there's even more areas going to be in focus behind the subject that you focus on. So the aperture, opening the lens up will affect how much area that's in focus, that's in front and in back of what you focus on. But again, yes, it's going to affect the amount of light, which will then affect, I'm losing track of my word. So if you have the aperture, which controls the amount of light, and we're going to go into shutter speed, which also controls the amount of light.
Yeah. All of them.
All three, right?
All three have an effect.
Photography, writing with light.
And if you change one and you want the same exposure, you have to change the other. Mm-hmm. So you can see, as you saw in the photos, the aperture has.
Where did Vera go?
She disappeared.
The aperture must be super.
She's right there.
I wanted to get closer. Someone was saying that this wasn't close enough when we were. Does that look good?
So it's out of focus.
Or maybe Izzy can hold it. I want to make sure we show.
I can sit, so we can show, so you can see.
You can see how short I am.
There you go.
It's such a cool way of understanding like what actually happens.
So as I open the lens, you can see that there's an actual iris in the lens, or aperture blade.
That's your aperture blade.
That open and close, and that's what's happening actually. If you have your camera on auto, your camera is controlling the aperture in the lens automatically, and all the time it will be at the maximum aperture. See if I can get that in focus.
There you go.
Whenever you put your lens on, it's always going to be at the maximum aperture, whether it's at 1.8, f3.5, f4. And then once you take the picture and the camera gets that exposure, it's going to close to the aperture that's needed to get the exposure to be properly exposed. And that's your aperture. And we're able to do this because this is an older lens. Lenses that are made currently, except with a few exceptions of certain lenses, they don't have aperture rings on the outside for you to control. But you can do that electronically with the command dials on the camera.
And we're back.
Thank you so much.
Awesome.
That was a great lesson. That was awesome. So are we done with the sample pictures for
the aperture?
Yes.
Aperture?
Yeah, if anybody has.
We have a couple of
To
questions.
see the questions.
That might not be entirely related just to aperture, but I want to make sure we get to these before the live stream ends. So we have one specifically. If a lens has a 1.8 max aperture, is it best to shoot portrait at 2.5 to 2.8 or even higher?
I'm assuming what they're asking is if probably to get the maximum sharpness out of the lens, and typically lenses are sharper when you close the lens down. So if I was shooting, I wouldn't shoot everything at the maximum aperture. I would probably close it down to like an aperture of f2, f2.8, just to make sure that if I'm looking for maximum sharpness, it's a good way to go by. But what's nice about having a lens that opens to 1.8 is that if you're comparing it against a lens that's maximum aperture is
Like
2.8,
or a kit lens.
typically
like a 3.5.
the 1.8 lens that's closed down to 2.8 will probably be sharper, or would probably be better at that chosen aperture.
Yeah, that's why sometimes people come in and they have the camera with the kit lens. This one happens to be that 18-55 IS.
Exactly. That's
and
why
this
we
is an f4.
Right.
So people are like, well, I want to be able to get a little bit more, and especially the crop sensor cameras. They don't like the high ISOs. That's the reason why something like this, the Nifty 50. I mean, this is available in other mounts too. I mean, there's Nikon has their own.
I think it's
Sony. Everybody has a Nifty 50 lens.
And this is the most affordable lens that Canon has available.
Yeah, it is.
So
Everybody should have this in
everybody
their
to have
kit.
it in their camera bag.
Yeah, that's an important.
We have a question from Tin Lon Chu. I hope I'm pronouncing that right, but he's always answering questions. So I think it's good when he asks something, we make sure we answer. How many focusing points does the camera have? Specifically, I'm assuming this is for the Canon SL2, which is the one we have here.
I believe it was 9 focusing points on this model.
Yeah, it's kind of, that's how they separate it between like the T7i and 77D, which has the 45-point
or
AF.
7D Mark IIs.
Right.
When you start getting into the larger camera,
But it still has
size,
dual pixel AF
which is
for
fantastic for focusing for video. Exactly.
Okay, awesome. So I guess it's a good time to get into shutter speed.
So shutter speed. So shutter speed on your camera.
Turn on. Magic.
So we can so as the aperture controls the intensity of the light, and the shutter speed refers to the amount of time the
Shutter stays
exposure
open and closed.
the sensor is exposed to light. So, and they're in fractions. So if you see numbers on, sometimes some cameras say 250, 60, 125, but in reality it's 1 over 60 or 1 over 125 or 1 over 500. And what you really, so the number is actually the denominator, and when the denominator is a large number, that means the shutter is open for a short amount of time, and when the denominator is a smaller number, it's open for a longer period of time. And the shutter speed, if you're not familiar with what the shutter speed controls, it controls whether or not you freeze motion or show motion in the frame.
Yeah, I think it actually shows it in this. This is that UI that they came up with, the graphic UI, and it shows somebody running. So basically, it shows the faster shutter speed.
You might have to zoom in.
you can zoom in.
Or you need like some really good vision, because.
Well, I don't know about vision on this one. It'd be more than 20/20, that's for sure.
But yeah, as Izzy's showing, Canon's user interface is really nice. It helps you out when, to try to make the best selection. And as you can see, there's 2 people, one sharp and one shows motion. So as you go to either way, you can choose a shutter speed that would give you the exact look that you desire.
I mean, I can go all the way down to
and we have
30-second exposure.
And we have some examples that we can show you.
Yes, we do.
Izzy was the photographer. I stepped in to be the model in this one.
Zumba action. Zumba.
So you would say that this is a good. It's good to know about shutter speed if you're taking action, sports, photography.
Or even something like your kids running around.
Right.
This is the one where if you want to freeze action, you want to pick, like Adam explained, that faster shutter speed.
Or if not, it's going to come out blurry.
Or you're going to create a blur effect.
Right.
And it all depends on the look you're going after.
Right. So we can go back to the photos, and I will show you right here. As you can see, I was jumping in the showroom. Jumping for joy. And this was shot at 1/30th of a second. And you can see that at 1/30th of a second, the camera is not able to freeze me in the frame. You can see that, practically nothing of my body when I jumped is sharp, or, sharp in the way of, there's a lot of motion.
You could have 3 eyes and 2 mouths, and
exactly.
we wouldn't.
Exactly.
Or do you now?
I might. But so you know, in order to freeze the action, you need a faster shutter speed. So, you know, you have shutter speeds on most cameras, they'll go from like, and since we started at 1/30th, they'll go 1/30, 1/30th, 1/60th, 1/25th, 1/250th, 1/500th, 1/1000. So what we did is we started at 1/30th of a second, just to, you know, just for sake of time, we can't go through all the different shutter speeds, but now I'm going to show you, you know, what it would look like at 1/500th of a second. And as you can see, once I change to 1/500th of a second, it is much sharper. But you can still see that like my hand is a little bit blurry. It didn't exactly freeze everything, but it looks much better than it did at 1/30th of a second. There we go. Now we took the camera outside, so we can use an even faster shutter speed.
And it was magical.
And it's magic. So if we clear that, you can see that now I'm sharp and everything on me is sharp. You can even see I'm exposed.
Look, I even stopped that car
I'm
back
exposed.
there before he hit
But
you.
yeah, now you can see that there's no, you know, whether or not you don't see motion blur here. You can see a defined line. As you see, there's a car that was stopped right behind me.
Wow, and it looks very, I mean, it looks good for, it was probably
You can read
driving.
the
Well,
digital.
this being Miami,
you
he was
can-
probably going pretty fast.
Yeah.
You can read the digital Goja sign on my shirt.
I even froze the
And
shirt movement.
you can even see the wrinkles in my face.
There you go.
But there you go. So, you know, if you're looking to freeze any type of action, you need to set the camera appropriately, because the camera's not going to know that you want to freeze the action. So there's modes like shutter priority, that
Even a scene mode. There's a couple
or
of
even
scene
the
modes.
scene mode, or you know, that you can plug in sports or in the UI, and that's Izzy.
I was going to say, is that shutter speed still? Because
I took over the
he
screen
looks
there.
very static.
And so there's modes like shutter speed, there's auto, there's the scene modes, there's the creative auto. You know, on Canon, that you know, there's modes that walk you through the step to ask you if you want to freeze the action. But remember, if you're seeing motion blur in your images, if you're shooting in auto, you know, you want to check to make sure your shutter speed's fast enough to freeze the action. There's a lot more into it, because there's times where you need shutter speeds that are faster than you need in certain instances. That's a little bit more advanced for than we can go into right now. But you know, just remember, you know, if you see a number like 1/500th of a second, that's going to be much faster, and that's going to be able to freeze most action, as opposed to a shutter speed of 1/30th of a second. But it also restricts the amount of light if you choose a fast shutter speed, so you have to adjust your aperture on your camera. So that's where some of the relationship comes in. If you do something to one setting, you have to make adjustments to the other.
So
triangle.
what would you say was your aperture at that when you took that picture outside?
That's a great question, because I think I didn't mention that. So outside, I was able to shoot at f2.5 at 1/4000th of a second, and that was at an ISO of 100.
Yep.
Nice.
So,
can we see that photo
right
again?
So shooting outdoors, I was able to use a lower ISO, which we're going to get into. I was able to use a very fast shutter speed, and I was able to shoot wide open, and that also helped out because there's a lot of distracting elements in the background. So it was able to kind of separate me from the background a
As
little
you
bit better.
flew to the clouds.
Yeah. As I flew to the crowd. Yeah, I was going to like give up the plane a high five.
Yep.
That's a nice photo.
So
I mean, we have a couple questions, but people have been answering as we go, just because it's a community, you know. This is how we are. That's how we roll.
That's how we roll.
So I guess since they've been answered, I mean, someone was asking what is the best aperture for portrait. I don't know if that question is a little too. It's maybe.
I mean, if
It
Izzy
depends
wants
on-
to.
Right. It depends if you want to have something in the background to enhance your portrait. You might want to close down a bit so that your subject matter is in focus and a pleasing background. Let's say you're at your favorite scenic spot and your favorite girl or boy is there, and you want to get that in the background too. You don't want to shoot at wide open because you might not be able to distinguish the background. So that's where you as a photographer or videographer have to make a decision on what you want to create in your image. If you want the background completely blurred and you want that soft bokeh blurred out effect, then you obviously are going to open up to your maximum aperture. But if you want to show some detail in the background, that's where you start closing down on the lens like we showed, and you shoot at maybe f8 or f11 and be able to get some more depth in the picture.
I think that's one of my favorite cinematic attention to detail, that sometimes when you're watching a movie or for film, not so much for taking pictures, but that's why I was asking if it's the same knowledge that you need for when you shoot videos, is when the background is like it's blurry. And I know that, do lenses go up in price the more blurry the background can be?
In general they do.
So you have a lens like the 50, the one that we have right here, and this sells for under $150, I believe.
Yep.
But it opens to f1.8. But then you have a lens from Canon, the same focal length, 51.2 f1.2, and that's over
$1,000.
Over $1,000.
So it's
So in terms of where you'll see lenses that are more expensive is typically prime lenses. You can, as we see here, you can find more affordable lenses that have a maximum aperture of f1.4 or 1.8. But when you get into zoom lenses that have apertures of 2.8 or f2, like Sigma has a zoom lens that has f2. You know, once you start talking about zoom lenses with very fast maximum apertures, and when I say fast, I'm referring to an aperture of like 1.8 or f2.8, you know, because it's referring to gathering a lot of light. But photographers use the term fast, you know, fast lenses. But it doesn't have anything to do with you know, fast or shutter speed. You know, it's just a term that
it's just to confuse
it's
some people.
Kind of confusing. But
thanks, photographers.
But zoom lenses will tend to be a lot more expensive that are able to have
like your 70 to 200 to 8
wide opening of 2.8.
Yep.
So last but not least, let's go over ISO.
So ISO in the camera refers to your sensitivity, your camera's, and it's really more advanced than, you know, but we can give a very basic, you know, we'll give an explanation of ISO. It's ISO, they use the term, it's
international
standards of organization or of operation. So, you know, an ISO 100, you know, back when film was available, if you bought a roll of Kodak 100 film or Fuji 100 film or Agfa,
Kodachrome 25,
it should all be the same, you know, sensitivity, but in reality, it doesn't, you know, it never worked like that. And same with digital cameras. A Canon camera that has an ISO 100 and a Nikon camera that has an ISO 100, Panasonic, Olympus, Fuji, Sony. It might be all a little bit different, but the principles are all the same.
Right. And
so the ISO is referring to the sensitivity, the given amount of sensitivity to the amount of light that's hitting it. And the lower the number, the less sensitive it is to light, and it will have a better quality. It will produce, your camera will produce a better quality image, better color quality, less image noise or artifacts. And then the higher the ISO will allow you to shoot in lower light, but will have sort of a negative effect on your image quality. It will produce more image artifacts or noise. Your images might look a little bit more soft, so you lose sharpness. But you know, cameras have come a long way where you can shoot at a lot higher ISOs and get very good quality. And that's what's really amazing, and what separates the cameras now from cameras in the past, where if you shot 3200 T-Max you would definitely not get the same results that you get from
golf ball grain.
Yeah. So,
You got some samples of that?
And we have some samples.
That we
Of
did here in the
Izzy.
showroom. Yep.
And I'll zoom in so you can see. This is actually, I kind of pushed the SL2. This is, and this was shot, granted, in a lot of light. We didn't have the ability to shoot in a very dark environment. But I'm going to zoom in so you can actually see, that there's a lot of image noise in this image, and you get a lot of color noise. If you can see,
look at it right
here,
there on the fringe.
here, over here,
Yep.
over here in this part, and his eyes. And we're going to go back to a full screen. When you're looking at, and it's not zoomed in, it looks pretty good. You can make a small print. You can share it on Facebook, Instagram. But let's say we go to...
It looks grainy, right?
It looks grainy or gritty. If you now go to an ISO of 400, and you can see that the exposure changed, so we were doing this pretty quickly. If you zoom in, and it looks like it's not in focus, so I apologize to everybody out there. But if you look in, you don't see the same amount of noise that you do in the other image at 12,800. The skin textures are smooth.
Thank you, focus on my mustache.
If you look at the eyes, obviously they're not. It's not the sharpest image, but you can see that there's not as much noise as there is at an ISO of 12,800. I think if you see the focus might have been down there, and nope, I am wrong.
Oh, I think you hit my
But just so everybody knows, an ISO of the higher the ISO you choose, which would also allow you to use a faster shutter speed indoors. Again, for freezing action. So if you want to freeze action, a higher ISO will allow you to do that. But you got to take into account that the image quality is going to be affected, and not all cameras can produce a great image at the high ISO.
Yeah,
but
some of the crop sensor cameras tend to have issues with the really high ISO.
Certain have limits,
Yep.
but that's where you change all your settings. You go through all your settings and you see kind of the threshold where you can shoot comfortably at without affecting your image quality. And that's the benefit of having a digital camera.
Nice. So it's like a constant math problem.
Every
time someone
it's
says
exposure value.
There's a lot of math that goes into it, but
or it's a balance, trying to keep
right. So I can
a game of balance.
I can spit out like 1/250th of a second shutter speed, f8, ISO 400, right? That's the three different settings. I can tell you that if you set your camera to 1/500th of a second and change it to f 5.6 and not change your ISO, you're going to get the same exposure or similar exposure. It depends on if you're outdoors and the clouds start moving. But if you're in a controlled environment, if you're starting out at 1/250th of a second, f8, 400 ISO, if you wanted a shallower depth of field, then you go to 5.6 and you change your shutter speed to 500th, you're going to get the exposure should stay the same. Because you're allowing more light to pass through by opening the lens up, but you're restricting light with the shutter speed, so it's kind of balancing off. It's bouncing off each other, shutter speed, aperture, but maintaining the same ISO. If you want to go to a faster and freeze action, you can go to 1/1000th of a second,
and then jump
and
up
then
on that
go
ISO.
go to an aperture of f4. And if you wanted a slower shutter speed and more depth of field, so it's the exposure. Everything has a relationship to it.
It's a relationship, yeah.
Yep.
And you got
Triangle.
triangle. And it, again, the easiest thing to do is set your camera on a tripod. Set your camera to aperture priority, AV on Canon, A on Nikon or Sony,
Or
Panasonic. Have someone help you out, or stick a doll on a table or something on a table, and
static object.
Take one picture at a 2 point whatever aperture range you have, and go through all the different aperture ranges you have, and then bring them into Photoshop or any type of photo editing software. Go through them, and you'll be able to see the different results. Do the same thing with shutter speed. set your camera on a tripod, have your subject jump like I did, or
Drop a
move,
coin.
drop a coin, do whatever, so you
Or
can see what effect
dropping water.
it has, and set your camera to shutter priority. And then go through your ISOs, change your ISOs, and see what effect it has. That's the easiest. With digital cameras, you don't have to run to CVS, Walgreens, any of those drugstores
To
develop
Wolf
a film.
camera?
develop
Wolf
photo.
camera.
That doesn't exist anymore.
So it seems like we have reached the end. And before thank you guys for all that great information. I know we had people thanking you from anywhere they're watching. Again, thank you so much for joining us. And what we're going to be giving away, you have to tune in to Saturday's video to find out if you are the winner. But we'll be giving away the Altura Photo Professional Rain cover. It's the one of our top sellers.
Yeah.
We have to not make sure we don't include it in our top seller videos every month because it's a really good cover. It's going to protect your gear under any condition. So
that's the best way to keep your gear working under any harsh environment. And again, here in Florida, we get to try them all out. We have the harsh rain, we have the sandy, dusty situation,
season.
and later on when people, get into the winter months, which we don't have here, if you're outside and it happens to be snowing, you don't have to stop shooting. You can go out with one of these and get some incredible shots too. So,
and make sure please to donate. We've put the link below for the Red Cross website, and you can donate for Harvey's to help people out that were unfortunately affected by Harvey. And anything else you might want to add on that note? And we like to end on a happy note, so let's just throw out some thumbs up if you liked our video. And thumbs up to Adam and Izzy for all the great info, guys.
Thank you very
Thank
much
you so much
for joining us again. Very happy that we can continue doing the YouTube live streaming for you.
And we'll catch you in the next one.
Happy shooting.
See you next time. Bye-bye.